Welcome to Last Minute Lecture. This free chapter overview is designed to help students review and understand key concepts. These summaries supplement, not replace, the original textbook and may not be redistributed or resold. For complete coverage, always consult the official text. Picture a patient taking 70,000 puffs of highly concentrated toxic chemicals straight into their lungs. Every single year.
Wow.
70,000. I mean, that is a pack-a-day smoker.
Welcome to our deep dive. If you are a nurse practitioner or an advanced practice nursing student listening to this, you are in the exact right place.
You really are.
Today, we're taking your study notes on Chapter 33, all about smoking addiction, and we're turning them into the actual clinical reasoning you need to, save that patient's life. This is a special last-minute lecture session.
Right, a true one-on-one tutoring session.
Exactly. Our mission today is to master the foundational science, the clinical assessment, and the patient-centered management of tobacco addiction.
And when you visualize that 70,000 number, it establishes the absolute clinical gravity of what we are dealing with here.
It's terrifying.
It is. Nicotine addiction isn't just like a bad habit. It fulfills every single strict criterion of a systemic drug addiction.
Right. We're looking at compulsive use, profound psychoactive effects, severe withdrawal, and deeply ingrained drug-reinforcing behavior. That's why cigarette smoking is responsible for 1 in every 5 deaths in the U.S.
1 in 5. And we see that massive systemic damage when we look at the clinical data in the chapter. I mean, we all know about lung cancer and COPD, obviously.
Yeah.
But the text lists things like Crohn's disease, osteoporosis, and even cataracts as directly associated with smoking.
Yeah, which always surprises people.
It really does. Why are those specific, seemingly unrelated areas taking such a hit? Like, how is the smoke pulling off damage that is so systemic?
Well, it all comes down to the delivery mechanism, right? Because tobacco smoke is inhaled directly into the lungs. It hits the alveoli.
Okay.
And from there, it immediately crosses the alveolar capillary membrane. So it's introducing all those toxins straight into the systemic bloodstream.
And the blood goes everywhere.
Exactly. The blood goes everywhere, so the toxins go everywhere. It triggers systemic inflammation, oxidative stress, vascular damage. It degrades bone density, alters the gut microbiome, damages the microvasculature of the eye. I mean, absolutely no body system is spared.
Man. And it's not just the smoker who absorbs that hit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Environmental tobacco smoke, what we usually just call secondhand smoke, is a known human carcinogen.
A major one.
Yeah, it causes over 41,000 deaths a year in non-smoking adults. And in pediatrics, it significantly increases the risk of lower respiratory tract infections in infants. Their tiny airways they can't handle that ambient inflammation.
Which is exactly why your clinical interventions as an APN have to start young. I mean, 90% of adult smokers started before age 18.
Wow, 90%.
Yeah. But you have to recognize the landscape has shifted, right? Combustible cigarettes are declining in teens, but e-cigarettes, vaping devices, mods that use has absolutely skyrocketed.
Right. And we need to know what's actually in those devices because the patients usually don't. The e-liquid is usually like a propylene glycol base, some flavoring, and highly concentrated nicotine or THC.
Uh-huh.
But a lot of kids genuinely think it's just harmless water vapor. And that ties directly into a massive clinical red flag we have to watch for, which is evil eye.
Right, evil eye. That stands for e-cigarette or vaping product use-associated lung injury. By February 2020, we saw 2,800 cases and 68 deaths linked to this.
That's horrible.
Mostly in young males, too. When they inhale these vaporized oils, it triggers a severe inflammatory cascade. We are talking about acute eosinophilic pneumonia and diffuse alveolar hemorrhage. The lungs basically fill with fluid and immune cells reacting to the oils.
And vaping isn't the only alternative we're battling. Dipping snuff, that moist tobacco powder, is actually increasing in teens, too.
Oh, yeah.
And that's directly linked to severe oral cancers because the carcinogens just sit right against that mucosal tissue for hours.
Right. So the big clinical takeaway here for students is that documenting tobacco and vaping status has to be treated as a new vital sign.
A new vital sign. I like that.
You can't wait until they're 30. You have to start screening in adolescents at every single visit.
Make it as routine as a blood pressure check. So let's talk pathophysiology. Let's look at what happens the second that smoke hits the body.
Let's do it.
When a patient lights a traditional cigarette, they inhale about 4,000 chemicals. There's a major carcinogen called 3-butyrene that triggers cellular mutation, But the engine keeping them smoking is the nicotine.
And inhalation is the most effective delivery method imaginable. About 90% of the nicotine that reaches the alveoli is absorbed immediately.
That fast?
Oh, yeah. It crosses the blood-brain barrier and alters brain chemistry within seconds. It's actually faster than an IV injection.
Okay, so here is where the acute cardiovascular effects get really interesting for clinical reasoning. Let's use an analogy. If hemoglobin is a bus, and its only job is to carry oxygen to the tissues.
Carbon monoxide is the bully on the bus.
Exactly. CO is the bully that shoves oxygen out of the way to take the seat. Because CO has a 250 times greater affinity for hemoglobin than oxygen does.
And it doesn't just steal the seat, it locks the doors.
Right.
When CO binds to hemoglobin, it forms carboxyhemoglobin. Clinically, this shifts the oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve to the left, meaning whatever oxygen is lucky enough to still be on that bus is held onto way too tightly. The hemoglobin refuses to release it to the tissues.
So you are suffocating the patient at a cellular level. And while that's happening, nicotine is slamming on the gas pedal, right?
Yeah.
Because it acts as a direct adrenergic agonist.
Precisely. It stimulates the sympathetic nervous system, releasing a massive amount of epinephrine.
So the heart rate spikes.
Heart rate spikes, systemic vascular resistance increases, blood pressure shoots up. So think about the hemodynamics. The heart is working much harder, pumping much faster, but because of that CO bully, the heart muscle itself is getting less oxygen to do the work.
It's the perfect recipe for myocardial ischemia. And what's happening locally in the lungs right then? The smoke is a massive irritant. It causes goblet cell hyperplasia.
Right, excess mucus.
Yeah, the mucus-producing cells multiply and overreact. And at the exact same time, the heat and toxins paralyze and destroy the cilia, those tiny hairs that are supposed to sweep the mucus out.
So you have massive mucus overproduction and no mechanical way to clear it. That is the fundamental pathos of a classic smoker's cough. They have to violently cough to expel what the destroyed cilia can't.
That makes a clinical picture so clear. But what about the brain? There's that fascinating PET scan study showing chronic smokers have a 40% decrease in an enzyme called MAOB. What does MAOB do, and why does this matter?
This is how the addiction gets permanently hardwired. MAOB breaks down dopamine, the neurotransmitter, for pleasure and reward. Since smokers have 40% less MAOB, their brains can't break down dopamine at a normal rate.
So when nicotine triggers a dopamine release, and there's less MAOB to clean it up, that dopamine just hangs around in the synapses for way longer.
Right, it creates an artificially prolonged sense of pleasure. It's a self-perpetuating loop. Suppressed MAOB means a massive dopamine reward, which makes the patient smoke more, which keeps the MAOB chronically suppressed.
Wow.
Eventually, the brain downregulates its own natural dopamine production because it relies entirely on the cigarette.
Which explains why quitting feels physically impossible. So based on all these systemic changes, what are you, the APN student, actually going to see in the exam room? Let's start with subjective findings.
Well, demographically, smokers often drink more coffee and alcohol. They typically have a slightly lower BMI and a noticeably faster resting heart rate.
From the constant inducic stimulation.
Exactly. You also have to assess unique reproductive risks. Female smokers face early menopause, and if they smoke during pregnancy, the risk of sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDs, is 2 to 4 times higher.
That's a huge red flag to educate on.
And you must assess for mood disorders. Clinical depression is twice as common in smokers, and it's a major barrier to cessation.
Objectively, we look for the physical clues, right? The smell of smoke, nicotine-stained nails. If they use smokeless tobacco, you look inside the mouth for periodontal disease or leukoplakia, those white, scaly, precancerous patches.
Yeah, you have to do a thorough oral exam.
And you listen for respiratory signs like a chronic productive cough, dyspnea on exertion, or expiratory wheezing.
You also need to recognize the timeline of nicotine withdrawal. According to the DSM-5 text revision criteria, it begins within hours of the last cigarette. It peaks right around 48 to 72 hours.
Which is when most people relapse.
Exactly, and it lasts a brutal 3 to 4 weeks.
And the symptoms are basically the exact opposite of the drug's acute effects. Nicotine raises heart rate and suppresses appetite. Withdrawal causes decreased heart rate, increased appetite, profound dysphoria, severe insomnia, and crippling anxiety.
The brain is just screaming for the dopamine it can't make on its own anymore. It's a physiological crisis.
Right, which makes our diagnostic reasoning so critical. The text points out a frustrating reality. Asking about smoking takes 15 seconds. Yet only about 20% of smokers actually get specific medical advice on quitting during a visit.
We have to do better. And as an APN, you have diagnostic tools to verify smoking status or confirm abstinence. You can test for cotinine, a major nicotine metabolite, in saliva or urine.
Or use an expired carbon monoxide monitor.
Right. The EC50 monitor is great for immediate feedback. The clinical threshold to remember for the boards is 9 parts per million. 9 ppm or lower generally means non-smoking status.
But how do we know if a level is elevated from smoking or if they just, spend an hour in heavy traffic?
Clinical judgment. You have to ask about occupational exposures. If your patient is an auto mechanic or a firefighter, their baseline CO might just run naturally higher. You treat the whole context.
And that context extends to lab work. Smokers have some really unique laboratory anomalies. Students, grab your pen.
Yeah, write this down.
Smokers often present with an increased hematocrit, increased white blood cells, and increased platelets. Why?
The increased hematocrit is the kidneys compensating for the chronic hypoxia from the carbon monoxide. They release erythropoietin to make more red blood cells. The elevated WBCs and platelets are just a response to the systemic inflammatory state.
And at the same time, they have decreased vitamin C, serum uric acid, and albumin. The vitamin C drop happens because it's an antioxidant, and the body burns through it trying to fight the oxidative stress from the smoke.
Exactly. And when building your differential diagnosis for a smoker's cough, you can't be lazy and just assume it's COPD.
Right.
You must actively rule out underlying lung cancer, interstitial lung disease, or hidden infections. Watch for red flags like hemoptysis or unintended weight loss.
Okay, so we have our assessment. How do we manage treatment? We use the 5A's algorithm: ask, advise, assess, assist, and arrange.
That's the gold standard.
You ask every patient. You advise them to quit with a strong, personalized message, like connecting it to their child's asthma. You assess readiness. You assist with counseling and pharm. And you arrange follow-up.
And that assess step is key. You match interventions to their stage of change. If they're in pre-contemplation, they don't want to quit, you just offer info.
Leave the door open.
Right. In contemplation, they're thinking about it, use motivational interviewing. Preparation is setting a quit date. Action is when they stop. And maintenance is after 6 months of stable abstinence.
The data warns that the action phase carries the highest risk for relapse. So how do we support them pharmacologically? Let's break down the drugs. First is bupropion or Zyban.
Bupropion is an atypical antidepressant. It's a weak inhibitor of the neuronal uptake of norepinephrine and dopamine.
Going back to that MAO-B dopamine loop.
Exactly. It mitigates withdrawal by keeping baseline dopamine circulating. But here's a crucial clinical pearl. They must start taking it 1 to 2 weeks before their quit date. It takes about 8 days to reach steady-state plasma levels.
But it has strict contraindications, right? Because it lowers the seizure threshold.
Yes. If they have any history of seizure disorders, do not prescribe it. It's also contraindicated for recent head trauma, active alcoholism, or eating disorders like anorexia, because those already compromise the seizure threshold.
Good to know. Next is varenicline, or Chantix. This is a partial agonist.
The partial part is brilliant. It binds to nicotine receptors, giving a small dopamine release to curb cravings. But because it's sitting on the receptor, if they slip up and smoke, the nicotine from the cigarette is blocked. They don't get the rush.
The titration schedule is specific to manage nausea. Start 1 week before the quit date. 0.5 milligrams daily for 3 days, then twice a day for 4 days, then up to the maintenance dose of 1 milligram twice a day.
But you must monitor for serious neuropsychiatric symptoms, severe depression, agitation, suicidality, especially if they have a psychiatric history.
Let's talk nicotine replacement therapy, NRT. We have 4 main delivery systems. Let's do a rapid-fire breakdown.
Sure. First, transdermal patches. They give a slow, continuous baseline delivery, have them rotate application sites. And if they report vivid nightmares, tell them to take it off at night and put a new one on in the morning.
Second is nicotine gum. You have to teach the chew and park method.
Right. You don't just chew it like regular gum. They chew until it tastes peppery, then park it between the cheek and gums for buccal absorption. And they absolutely must avoid acidic foods or coffee for 15 minutes before use because acid ionizes the nicotine and blocks absorption.
Third, the nasal spray.
Fastest delivery method. Peaks in 4 to 15 minutes. Great for sudden cravings, but it causes initial rhinitis and watery eyes. Avoid in severe asthma patients.
Then fourth, the inhaler. which is a bit of a trap name, right?
Yeah, it doesn't go deep into the lungs. It's absorbed buccally, but it perfectly mimics the hand-to-mouth ritual of smoking, which is a huge psychological comfort.
And you can combine these. Combination therapy is the gold standard now, a patch for baseline, and a spray or gum for breakthrough cravings.
Yeah.
And nortriptyline as a second-line option. This brings us to health promotion. Quitting isn't just willpower. As an APN, you have to proactively manage side effects like severe constipation and weight gain to prevent relapse.
Nicotine is a stimulant. Without it, GI motility slows down. Recommend Metamucil and lots of fluids. For the expected 5 to 7 pound weight gain, start a walking program early. It burns calories and relieves stress.
And we can't ignore the psychological component. There's a case study in the text about a World War II machine gunner, freezing, terrified. He said a cigarette was his only source of warmth, comfort, and safety. He said there were times the warmth of a cigarette was the only thing that kept us alive.
It's a humbling reminder. You have to understand the actual meaning of smoking to the person sitting across from you.
Right.
It's woven into their coping mechanisms, their history, reframing the behavior and building their self-efficacy. Their belief that they can cope without it is just as important as prescribing a patch.
It puts the patient back in patient-centered management.
It really does. Which leads me to a final provocative thought for our listeners. An evidence-based practice study showed that nursing students themselves have very low clinical knowledge about alternative tobacco products, like hookahs and vapes, even though they use them at high rates.
Think about that. If you don't know what chemical is in the vape your patient is holding, or what inflammatory cascade it triggers, how can you help them quit? We have to educate ourselves on the modern landscape of this addiction.
Exactly. You're going to be on the front lines of this epidemic.
Well, congratulations on mastering the foundational science, diagnostics, and pharmacology of smoking addiction. Remember, stable abstinence often takes 5 or 6 serious attempts. Patience is key.
Very true.
From all of us here on the Last Minute Lecture team, a huge thank you for trusting us with your APN exam prep. Remember that pack-a-day smoker taking 70,000 puffs. Look at the carbon monoxide stealing the oxygen. Look at the MAOB rewiring the brain. And look at the human being who just might need you to ask them for 15 seconds if they're finally ready to quit.